Okay. All right. Welcome everyone this evening to our virtual artist curator talk for our feminist art exhibit. My name is Dr. Lesley Sotomayor, and I'm currently an educator at Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania. And I'm one of the co-curators, and I'm facilitating this talk with Sally Brown, who is the other curator for this show. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Sally for her to introduce herself and say a little bit about why we are all here and how we have all connected through the feminist art exhibit that is virtual.
Hi, thanks Lesley. Thanks everyone for being here. I just turned on the slideshow for this exhibit that hopefully you've all seen. We can just look at it while I'm talking for just a minute. So Les Femmes Folles is a organization of me that I created 10 years ago, first by curating an exhibit called Les Femmes Folles that featured 5 women artists doing work around the body. That was in Omaha, Nebraska, curated by my mentor, Wanda Ewing. And it was a time where I'd given up art and I kind of needed like an impetus. I needed to see other women making art. And so that exhibit kind of got me back into art after having babies and feeling like I could do it. And it was also really popular. People in the town were really excited about it. You know, there hadn't been like feminist or all women's exhibitions for a long time. And so it just sparked the blog where I interview women artists, and then a whole series of exhibitions that I've had since then. And I've featured over 1,000 women on the blog, always looking for more, all levels, styles, wherever you're from. And also have done some performances, readings, discussions, other things like that. So I really wanted to celebrate 10 years of doing this in a way that's close to me. I love, obviously, there needs to be more documentation of women artists. We all know that. And so my blog and exhibitions that I curate are a small part of that, but also with the exhibit is kind of the double layer of, we're not only showcasing your awesome contemporary work from artists that are alive and making stellar work right now, but also paying homage to those feminist artists before and around us through your work and your words. So it's all the things that are close to me, and that Lesley does work that is also heavily, I think, inspired by other feminist artists. So I think that our partnership in this exhibit just made a really amazing one with all of your work. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lesley with how we came to curate this exhibition with 42 artists. I thought it was 40, but then Bernadine counted 42.
Awesome. Thank you, Sally. So when Sally invited me to co-curate and look at the work, we got over 200 submissions for this art exhibit, which blew our minds because, you know, we were putting out the call and we were both, you know, putting it out on our social media and, you know, connecting with different people that we knew that we thought would be great candidates for it. We had no idea where, you know, what kind of response we would get back. So we were completely floored that over 200 artists not only thought that it was a worthwhile endeavor and effort to take time to share with us their work and their creative process, but to also make these connections, these larger connections to feminist philosophy and the scholarship and research as feminists. And kind of begin to thread those things together through their individual experiences, which now in this beautiful body of work as a virtual art exhibit becomes a collective experience. And so Sally and I took our time and we went through all 200 plus submissions individually, making notes, having some questions, reflections as we were doing that. And then we came together for an afternoon where we, you know, Zoomed like this and had our shared screens on and our notes out and looked at all of the work together. the artist statements, and really had meaningful conversations around what it is that artists were sharing with us, and how did that fit into our larger theme of connecting with this feminist larger conversations in the United States and internationally. And so we thought a lot about what creative process and art made those strong connections to feminist scholarship and research and feminist creative process. And that's what we used as our guide in selecting the work. It was a hard decision throughout the conversations, because there was so many amazing works. But ultimately it rendered on what were the really strong connections to feminist scholarship and research. And that's the final product that you have viewed. So that in a nutshell was how we went about choosing the works and coming to the 42 artists that we chose and their pieces. And then the second layer is, because the work has been so strong and the array of artists and the different themes and social issues through feminist scholarship were brought up through these art pieces, that we thought, how can we have a conversation with some of the artists to unpack some of this feminist theoretical language and representations and expressions in other meaningful ways. And so we decided to choose three artists who are here with us today. And let's see if we can, and ask them to sit down and have a conversation with us and invite you all to be a part of it. And so we're hoping that this is an informal space where, please feel free to use the chat. I see that many of you are already using it. So feel free to use the chat. Feel free to use the reaction emojis on the bottom of your Zoom screen to the right, to either raise your hand or to, just kind of reflect on what you're feeling as you're hearing things being said. And we hope to open this up as a discussion where we will begin with our guest artists who are being featured in this Zoom talk. But we don't want the conversation to end there, right? And so we invite you to be a part of our conversation. So I hope that you feel that and that you will take us up on our word with that. So the first artist that we invited, people are still coming in, it's great. So the first artist that I want to, well, let me do this. I will introduce all three briefly, and then I'm going to turn it over to each one of them to introduce themselves a little bit more in depth and say a little bit more about themselves. Sara Ishii, am I pronouncing that? Okay, Sara Ishii is one of our artists. Brenda Stumpf, and Nayda Cuevas is our third. And so we are really excited that they took us up on our invitation to be a part of this today, and not only to showcase their work and their scholarship, but to engage in discussion about it. So I'm going to turn it over first to Sara, and then Brenda, and then Nayda. Okay.
Hi, I'm Sara Ishii. It's really great to be here and to be able to chat with you all tonight. I guess just briefly a little bit about myself. I have a background in studio art and painting and digital art from the University of Texas at Dallas. And then later I came to kind of a stronger feminist consciousness and decided to do a master's and then a PhD in women gender studies. And so now I kind of have this opportunity to blend those two worlds together. And so I'm really excited to do art that examines my personal experiences and then also examines different social justice issues and trying to find ways in which I, as an artist, can contribute to those conversations.
Thank you, Sarah. Brenda?
Hello, my name is Brenda Stumpf. I currently live in Colorado here. And, you know, it's funny, I just had a really big move in my life. So life has shifted a lot, as we've all had in this last year or so. So art for me has taken on a real mega feeling of how I feel through transitions in life. And so for me as an artist, since let's say 1995 professionally, the way in which I feel through materials, in one way, I think I would have been an archaeologist had I not been an artist, because as you can see, some of my work is so tactile, and I have to dig around and manipulate things in order to make sense of what I'm doing. I went to art school for a couple of years and then ditched it. So I've been feeling my way through this roller coaster of life for a while now. And my work, like I said, archaeologically feels like I need to dig around and go to a almost like an ancient place, almost like a timelessness space, rather than maybe something that's so present and so current. I tend to try to bridge things that are happening in the now with things that have happened in the past, even if it's like mythology and things of that nature. So that's kind of a nice little bucket to put in kind of where I go and how I do what I do with my goodies. So thanks for having me here.
Awesome. Thank you, Brenda. Nayda?
Hello, my name is Nayda Cuevas. I began making art what it felt like to me as a process of creating connections with the people around me at a young age after my parents migrated from Puerto Rico to Florida. I found art to be an easy means of introducing a dialogue with people around where I was from. And that eventually turned into expressing my identity through portrait making or art making. And the specific series on here entitled #FierceLatina stems from how we're currently researching and seeing things on social media, on the internet, and trying to extend further dialogue from the internet or the media world, right? And specifically Latino identity in this country. As a Latina, having spent my teen years in Florida, there was a lot of stereotypes and racism that I had to overcome and find ways to create awareness of otherness with the people that were around me, and how could I interact with my community and continue to teach others and educate others about being Latina, and what did that mean, and what does that mean for me and for other women around me. I'm very active, and I feel like I want to be an activist about, we're not just Sofia Vergara or Jennifer Lopez. We are smart individual women who are activists and engineers and scientists and strong, powerful women. And so that's my art practice and my art making it's my response to the things that are around me and whatever comes into my life, and how I find ways to express or digest whatever I'm receiving and then bring it out creatively.
Awesome. And I think that is a great segue to our first question that I'm going to put out there for us to start to unpack and think about together. The themes of contradictions and identity, women's roles in society are, I think, all broached in each of your works in very different ways. Can you expand upon the space conceptually that you were navigating in creating your visual work? And I think that you all kind of touched on that with your little intros, but maybe we can unpack that a little bit deeper. How are these either resisting or challenging traditional tropes of women, Latinas, in society and culture, impact the creative process, the studio process, and how we're thinking about the art that you are each making. And anyone can kind of go with that.
I think I'm very passionate. So like for me, it's like a automatic response, and it's like this thing that whatever this information that may bother me or may activate something in me has to be released through my hands. And I found art as something that's very relaxing and soothing. And just apart from creating something, whether I'm painting it or creating it in clay or any other medium, it's part of the healing aspect of these social constructs that are enforced on us by society, and how I can proactively, in a positive way, push forward that, well, this is what I'm going to create. My art, I'm going to show you. I'm going to make you stand in a gallery space, and you're going to look at these women who you may not have otherwise known about. And I'm going to make you read about them. And we can, engage in a conversation around, who these women are and what they've done in society, and where they live.
Oh, I just realized I was muted. I'm sorry. Thank you. Sarah or Brenda, do you want to share?
Sure. I mean, I think what I'll do is the specific piece, the red piece that is from a body of work titled Blood Roses, A Cycle of Souls. That piece in particular, and it's kind of representative of how I approached this whole body of work, was a seed. I never have a plan. I have a seed. It's like a little keyhole into a world that's like a scavenger hunt that leads you from one little thing to another thing. And that seed for me was my sister had some miscarriages. So it's a woman's pain going through things like this. There's a big pocket of interesting things you can go into with that. But she did finally get pregnant and have a child. And as my odd research and where it takes me starts to go to female infanticide, pain of death, things of this sort, I tend to kind of have it's like a little magnet. I like to dive into these kind of strange, very potent sadness, and things like this intrigue me. And what happens with this is that, this piece is very large. It's like 96. So where there's baby doll pieces and parts and that, and it's very dramatic. But what tends to happen for me is moving through these things, these emotional states, talking with women, doing this research, going into the ancient aspect of blood and earth. And I mean, this is where it starts to get, instead of this just linear A to Z, it's like a constellation. It's like there's all these different points where at some point in the process of making my work, everything starts to gel together and becomes this very almost like holographic thing that holds the space for all of this pain and rejuvenation and transformation. And so for me, like, this is the kind of world that happens when I'm in the studio, and where I need to follow one thing to another thing because I don't know how it's moving for quite a while. So, if that's of interest to kind of where I'm at in the present moment with work as it's being kind of manifested.
Okay. Sarah?
I think that in this particular series, it really called me to be self-reflective, to think about how I was experiencing my biracial identity, and now had experienced it for quite some time growing up and becoming an adult, and how there's these Western societal expectations of what an Asian woman should know, for example, in terms of, maintaining culture or language, and then also what an Asian woman should look like in terms of physical features. And I mean, just based on, the concoction of genetics, like I look more like my white mother than my Japanese American father. And so I don't meet those societal expectations. And especially since my family has been in the US for quite some time, that the issue of assimilation really is something that has just impacted how my family's like existed within the United States. And so within these series of paintings, I'm really examining my own sort of reactions to how people react to me when they, like if I tell someone that I'm half Japanese, oftentimes I'm told, oh, you don't look Japanese. And then are asked oftentimes a series of questions, which I really kind of felt like were almost a way to reconcile this cognitive dissonance of this person who didn't see me as Japanese, but I was saying otherwise. And so hence the titles of the paintings, for example, do you speak Japanese? Have you been to Japan? And so in these cocoon paintings, the cocoon is what sort of represents this expectation. And in these pieces, I'm trying to work past my feeling of, I don't know, not being enough and not fulfilling these expectations, and kind of being able to reclaim my identity, author my own identity, and do that through paint. So I think that this series was very cathartic and healing as well.
So the one of the things that I'm hearing all three of you touch on is this idea of pain or trauma or some sort of healing that has needed to take place, or that you are grappling with in some way, right? Whether that's assimilation or loss or grief or dislocation. It seems like that's one of the threads that ties all three of your work together, as far as a theme that is, one of the themes that you touch on. So I want to kind of piggyback off of that, what I'm hearing you talk about. How is it healing through the studio? How can healing be embodied through the studio process? I think that Sara, maybe you each started touching on it by expressing yourselves in your studio as a way to heal. Can we say a little bit more about that? Can we unpack this? Because I think as women in particular, and marginalized identities, we tend to not necessarily talk about our pain and our grief and how to heal individually and as a collective, and through our creative process. So maybe you all want to say something more to unpack that a little bit further.
Yeah, so I have a 9-year-old, and at 9 years ago, adding in motherhood and being a wife and having an art practice and finding a balance between all those things. I think that art practice was definitely, it was extremely important for me, finding a time and space for me to produce my artwork, because there's this I don't know, for me it was this feeling that this creates something that needs to come out. I need to create something. It has to come out of my body, my consciousness, my head. When I know when I'm painting or creating anything, whatever medium, I completely get lost. I am thinking about that. It's a form of meditation almost. It's relaxation. So it's part of that desire and need that I think, and ability to find that time and space that allows for that healing, because there's at the end of this time, there's this product, there's this finished piece that, you know, I step away from and I say, wow, I just made that, I just did this. And then there's all this deeper context and meaning that's in that that I just created. So it just has all these layers of potential and of sharing with others. That's a great satisfaction for me.
Anyone else?
And one of the other pieces, the other red pieces, I have done in the past a lot of research, and I'm intrigued by the women and the girls around the time of the Inquisitions, their crusades and things of that sort. And that's exactly what that second red piece is about. And in that composition, there's all this kind of material, these threads that kind of go up from the left to the right. And what that is that's an unraveled nylon rope. And if you've ever sat there and tried to unravel something rather than weaving, so if you think of weaving circles, things together, this was about every time I would unwind that rope and there would be one thread. And it was like I was taking each one of these filaments was like one of these women, and all of the stories in the research are horrific. But in doing that, it was this focus of energy that came in, and then you were making it into something, like she was just saying, something tangible, something that you're a part of. And I don't know if it's like being a surrogate in a way, and being in a studio as an artist, as a woman today, focusing on these other women's lives and working with that energy and that focus, for me is, again, it's deep and it's rich, and it's that very meditative quality of doing those threads together that sort of brings it this piece. And then the titles of all that work has this kind of salve, this balm of a Neruda poem, and it's lovely. So you do the arc of you start with this point that's horrific, and you move through it and you transmute it, and it becomes something else. And for me, that process is hands down, there's nothing like it. There's nothing like it.
That transformation through the,
because you're part of something that you're like I said, that constellation of different points in time, and it's all happening now. Oh, I just love it.
Sara, did you?
Very sorry. I always have to forget to do the unmute. Yeah, so in connection with healing, it's also like this opportunity to like speak my own truth. And I think that that's really powerful. And the ability, just like we're doing now, to have art be this vehicle to spur conversations. So for example, in doing these pieces, that really prompted a conversation between myself and my mother, who had never understood things from my perspective and my experiences. And so that was really useful. And then, just being able to talk to other people about my experiences in terms of identity. And then, in later works where I'm kind of unpacking being a survivor of emotional and verbal abuse, that really has helped me connect to other survivors too. And that's a really powerful thing, and also, very healing as well.
So, one of the things that I'm hearing each one of you say or talk about is how your lived experience in some way, right, is deeply intertwined, and your testimonios, right? Not only what you've gone through, but how that going through something has impacted you and changed you in some way, right? That transformation that I think Brenda and was also talking about earlier. And so I'd love to unpack further what is some of the scholarship and some of the influences of those women who came before you, artists, curators, researchers, scholarship, craft, folk art. What are those, who are those people that have impacted your work and are in your studio with you? Our ancestors who are creating with us. I would love for you to unpack that a little bit and maybe share with us, you know, that lineage for you in your studio process. Anyone can take it.
Yeah, for the past like 5 years or so, my art practice has involved a lot of research based. So not just looking at other artists, but also looking at written like word, and depending on the project, I'm doing different research. But I mean, it may sound like corny or taboo, but Frida Kahlo was such an amazing artist, and for very many reasons, and just deserves so much respect than what society, you know, fetishizes, or I don't know what word to use, with her style and her image. But there's a lot of pain and a lot of healing that I'm sure she herself, you know, had through process of painting. She was one that painted, you know, her experiences and the pain, and very visible. But I do, you know, right now, for the past 5 years for me, what has been very heavy in my studio is just the social media, and how we're all impacted, and how we're currently consuming images at an alarming rate and volume, and not really understanding and digesting what we're consuming via these digital, you know, devices. And, you know, what women can we follow, and that are positive role models, and not adding to that negativity that we may find in social media. So for me, finding different individuals that are being positive and form of activism are it's something that I do for my art practice. I'd have to, like, I'm horrible at remembering names, so I'd have to like go down my list of artists that I follow on my own Instagram and things like that to be able to give you more details of the women that I follow.
No, but what you're hitting on is that the importance of knowing about each other, right? And
Yes.
and having this information and access to each other as sources of information and feeding our studio practice and our scholarship and our research and what we write about. And so, you know, how does identity and cultural context then also weigh into this, right? You had mentioned about Puerto Rico and your experiences on and off the island throughout your life a little bit. So, you know, that all becomes information and important, it sounds, in your work that you're creating. Is that?
Yes. So for me, my Puerto Ricanness, my Boricua identity it's very heavy. Again, I'm white. I'm a white Puerto Rican, so that's pointed out to me a lot. I'm constantly asked, or you know, the comment is, "Oh, but you're white." I was like, "Yes. Can I give you a little bit of history about that?" And, you know, and understanding colonialism and how, you know, the Spaniards made it all the way to the Caribbean, and the enslaved that were brought in, and the indigenous people that, you know, brought in. And so also finding, you know, again, in wanting to create community connections, never segregation, never separation, in wanting to create those community connections, for me, advocating, educating through my art just made it an easy, not easy, like an easier way to transition into a conversation without having like some sort of like negative reaction from individuals. And I'm talking about Puerto Rico, and, you know, especially after Hurricane Maria, and, you know, that was very heavy with my art making and my art practice and what I was talking about. And the women that that came, that were being focal points, Cortés and Carmen Yulín Cruz in San Juan, Puerto Rico. They were all women that were on the news and more on social media. And why is it important? Why are they important figures that we should highlight? The things that they have done positive in society and where they're at. So that, again, just another layer, trying to include them in the art world.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, that was a really wonderful example of how you merge and those different aspects of your identity, right, intersect. But Sara and Brenda, I started with the question of feminist scholarship and lineage that you see connected to your work and your studio process.
So two artists, women artists that have always kind of been it's like a guide of how I feel about art and materials and context of work in general, like Louise Bourgeois and Peter Coyne that I mentioned in a statement. But for me, a lot of scholarship, things that come to me, because I'm not, like I said, I left art school and after 2 years. So I've always kind of done this weird points of finding information and that resonated with me and sort of tried to like insert it in me. And it always tends to go to the mysticism. It's, for me, a lot of things end up being more mythological, abstract in nature. Just like I was talking about, like my sister had miscarriages and people from a different time. And I feel like I'm always like this surrogate carrying around this pain and sort of trying to transmute it. So I'm sort of trying to see things in a more symbolic way. And how one way I could put it in short, it's like, if we were all these buildings and it's a street view and a street level, you can see things from a certain level. You can go down underneath the building and you can start to see a different thing going on. And you can take the elevator and go up and all of a sudden things start to have a bigger, broader view. What I tend to love is finding these different connections from getting to a different perspective and starting to go, I'm here 2021. Where am I going? But who was this over here and who was that over there? And then taking something like mysticism that throws you way up for a huge perspective, but also when you go down to the depths, like a mythological tale that still holds this nugget of truth for females and feminine and wisdom, and how all of that starts to come together. I tend to go that way. I somehow have to go in the past to understand myself, because I think, in short, I have a lot of blind spots that no matter where I'm driving, and I feel really confident about, and some of these women have made me have a clearer path, I still have these blind spots. So it seems like I have to go to the symbolic and the abstract to sort of be able to get that view so that I can get my vision a little more broader in perspective.
Awesome. Thank you, Brenda. Sara?
For this particular series, I was really inspired by Gloria Anzaldúa, who was a queer Chicana creative writer and scholar. And while I was working on this series of work, I was also completing my dissertation on Anzaldúa. And although many people know her from her writings, especially Borderlands La Frontera, she also was a visual artist too, and she studied visual art as well as English in her undergrad, but then switched over to just focusing on writing because she kind of felt she had to choose one or the other. And so one of the theories that she broaches in or starts to kind of unpack in Borderlands is Nepantla. And so Nepantla is a Nahuatl word for in between two places or spaces. And so for Anzaldúa, this Nepantla state is this place where you're kind of caught in between to things, to feelings, to ideas. So for example, if you kind of like understand this way of knowing, and that's how, you know, you have lived your life, but then you get this new information and you're trying to like negotiate those two ways of thinking and being. And so I thought that how true that felt to me, feeling kind of caught between two races, expectations for both, and that, you know, needing to be able to take that time to reflect on how I was feeling in that space, but then also be able to move through that. Because for Anzaldúan, when you move through this Nepantla space, at the end, you come out with this greater understanding. And that was my ultimate goal, to come out with a better understanding of myself that wasn't so tied to these expectations, and that was more grounded within me. And so Anzaldúan was a major figure that I was looking at and reading at that time.
So I do have a couple of other questions, but I also want to invite the audience to be a part of the discussion more actively. Are there any questions or comments, reflections as you're hearing these Sara, Brenda, and Nayda talk about their work, their creative process, that might that anyone would like to share?
Bernadine had a question. She asked a question that I never ask. She asked, are there any male artists that influenced you? And I see Nayda posted in the chat, Fabiana Rodriguez, Michelina Thomas, Laura Simpson, Kara Walker, and then male artist Roger Shimomura, male artist Antonio Martorell, I'm probably mispronouncing, and Miguel Luciano. Anybody else want to comment on that?
Oh, just quickly. So Roger Shimomura did a great body of work from the diaries of when I believe was his grandmother were in the internment camps, the Japanese internment camps, and that was a form of inspiration of the image creation of that work that was inspiration for me for a specific body of work. And Antonio Martorell is a Puerto Rican artist who was, I think he's late 70s, almost 80, and just, I mean, I've met him, and he's just very active individual in art making, and very giving and very supportive of all artists, female, male, you know, it doesn't matter. It's not discriminatory. And Miguel Luciano was another colleague who, based out of New York, from Puerto Rican parents, who again talks about this identity as well in his body of work. So there's a lot of great artists that influence.
Awesome. Does anyone else? Can you read the question again, Sally?
I think it was just, do any male artists influence you, or have any male artists influenced you? Mm.
Oh, I definitely would say for sure Anselm Kiefer, hands down. Taking materials and just transforming them as an alchemist would, and the scale of the work and things that go into history, and the cosmos, and how just everything is connected. And he plays with history as part of his media. And for me, it's very much like a kinship, I would say, for me, because materials are so important. So when I see somebody having the command and the just be able to destruct just as much as create on the surface of something is, for me, I share that a lot. Yeah, he's one for me.
For me, for this series in particular, looking at African-American artist Kehinde Wiley, in his portrayals of Black and brown, typically men, but then also women as well. And I love the way in which he, recalls these major art history portraits of the typically wealthy white men, and completely flips the script and showcases people that he comes into contact with, either through like in the areas that he lives or in his travels, in order to really highlight the lives of, for example, African-American men who are oftentimes not, seen in art, right? And so I really respect the work that he's doing, and just his pattern work and the figurative portraiture and the scale is amazing.
I think that is wonderful to Bernadine, not only the question, but to make us think about how these spaces in our creative practice can be really fluid, right? And that's what each of you are saying, the fluidity of how feminist art does not have to exclude voices, but include them in very intentional ways, as you're all discussing throughout your artwork, and engaging with it in these layering ways. Sally, I thought I saw another, hold on. Yeah, Diana had posted a question. She asked, Stumpf used the language of surrogacy numerous times, and this stood out to me. In thinking of the feminist scope of this art, could the artist say more about ways in which art creation is a sort of birthing?
Sure. I mean, I feel it's a great question. I feel just like an actual child, and we take care of them. We try to prepare them for the world, but at the end, they do belong out in the world. So, like for me, my body, a specific body of work or creation, it's to myself when I am creating, when I'm in the studio space. I'm protected over it. I don't like to bring many people in that process. It's my space. But once it's done, like it's no longer mine. It belongs out for the viewers, out for other people. It's no longer, what I kept for myself. What I kept for myself was the process of making it. But it no longer belongs to me after it's been completed.
Letting it out into the world. Yeah. Yeah. Brenda, did you want to say more to it too? Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah, can you just repeat that one more time? The question.
Sure. Stumpf used the language of surrogacy numerous times, and this stood out to me. In thinking of the feminist scope of this art, could the artist say more about ways in which art creation is a sort of birthing?
I almost don't see it. I can't say that it's not every single time. It's always a birthing. It's always a birthing. And especially from someone who never wanted children. For me, art has always been that creative action and experience. In fact, I remember from a very young age making that kind of a decision with my life. I didn't have room for both. And I know a lot of people who get stuck because they never do a creative birthing and they jam the circuits. And I could talk days about that. So for me, it's like every single time you pick up that material, it is you are actually starting that process. And it's so powerful, whether it's a drawing or whether it's something that takes, for me, sometimes 3 years to make. That entire gestation period, and when it actually starts to feel like it's coming through and it's sort of it's so similar. When I talk to people, explain that birthing process of actually having a child, if you had to write them down, the feelings and the process are so in sync. There's kind of really no separation for me energetically of making that work. It's very much, I don't remember a time that it never felt like that. So whether it's about the piece itself and the context of that piece, or feeling that I have actually burst, it's like the simultaneous experience, and it's very powerful. And I think that's why we still continue to do this.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I was thinking about as you were speaking earlier on about your work is that, in conjunction with what you're saying now, is that this birthing like experience in a visceral way through your painting and the studio process, and that the piece that we were viewing when you were talking about initially was about a loss and a grieving. And so, I think that there's birthing is also a loss of something, right?
I totally agree.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that tension there that exists, that contradiction that exists simultaneously. Yeah, it's powerful. Sarah?
It is.
I guess maybe to build off on what you were saying, Brenda, was also just how hard it is. I mean, giving birth like physically was hard, and then just like making art is hard. But you like have to do it, right? You can't not. And I remember, to bring Anzaldúan back into the conversation, she writes about her creative process and this challenge and how she is compelled to create, but how difficult that is. And something along the lines of how much easier would it be to just carry a child for 9 months and be done? But with art, it's ongoing. And even though there's so much just amazing feeling from being able to actually do that sort of creative birthing, to get there, sometimes it's really tough. But of course, it's always worth it. And thank you, Diana, for your question.
Yeah, and I have, well, I'm just gonna make a note of my thoughts on what was just said, but there's another question in the chat. I'm trying to see who it's from. Caitlin. Hi, are there any moments in which you could tell your art really enlightened or even changed how someone saw the world? Oh my goodness, all of a sudden sorry. How someone saw the world, themselves, women, social issues, marginalized people, etc. In other words, after having viewed your art, has anyone shown a new understanding that really stood out to you? It sounds like a transformation question almost. So are there any moments that you can speak to that changed how someone saw the world, themselves, women, social issues, marginalized people differently because of your work?
So I did an artist in residence at a high school. It's one of these in Massachusetts 2 years ago. And it's one of these high school where, like tuition is $100,000. So they're for the people that are high in society, or economically. And I'm this Latina artist who has this exhibition on their walls, and I'm producing actually the body of work that it's on display now. I produced it while my residency there. And I had work around Puerto Rico and around Latino identity as well. I had my series of 100 women trying to showcase the diversity within the social construct of race and the term and of the word used, Latina. And there was some controversy that popped up in the gallery space in that high school because one of the portraits was removed because of political reasons, and I think more was because of there was a middle finger involved in one of the paintings. But one of the young women one of the high school students came up to me while we were trying to engage in conversations. So my whole aspect of not just the part of art making is also, you know, having a space, providing a space where the viewer, and in this part, the young people, high school age, are being exposed to these themes and contexts and the social construct of these terms, and they're standing, where do they fit in these conversations. And this young woman came up to me, like tears in her eyes, like so upset that this painting was removed, because it was just like, for her, it was like, you know, like the words that she used was, I finally feel visible in this high school, in this community where she's a very small percentage of the minority in that high school. And that really, you know, touched my heart, because I could clearly see in her eyes that this mattered, that having my presence there, my artwork there, mattered for this young woman who has for 4 years been in this high school and felt invisible. You know, her Latinidad, where she was from, being from Puerto Rico. So for me, that's just part of the process, part of the cherry on the top when we have our work out there, and we have young people, you know, we're talking about 17, 18 years old, coming up to you and having these feelings and feeling passionate about a conversation. And that opened up an opportunity to not just talk to that one student, but it was a conversation that was had in the entire school. Just a tiny little painting, a tiny little 3x5 painting, opened up a whole can of worms for a high school that it was just like, wow, it was incredible.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I want to just interject that Pauline made the comment on the chat that I didn't birth the way most women birth. I had 2 cesareans. So I don't see it in that mode, what we were talking about previously about birthing. I see it as creating a painting just as I created 2 human beings. And so that larger context. And I was also, as you all were talking, I was also thinking about how I have witnessed and experienced with really close friends of mine, carrying all the same body parts as me, and I've been able to get pregnant and have children through C-sections, like Pauline, and having female friends that have not, you know, been able to do that, then have not been able to experience that. And so I think that when we talk about these topics about birthing, you know, a really good point that Pauline's bringing up here is that we can all be talking about the same topic with very different perspectives, right? Just like Brenda mentioned her sister's loss and miscarriage, right? And so that place in the spiral is different for each one of us, even though we're grappling with the same types of topics, right? I'm looking at the time and there's like still so many questions. We have a minute left, but I don't want to go over it. So one of the other questions real quick is question about the future of your feminist artwork and process. How will your artworks be different, or discuss the progression of the threads you will be exploring? So I don't know if turning it to maybe Sara and Brenda next, if you want to, you know, just talk about where your work is going or what you're doing right now.
Yeah, I'm actually right in the middle of doing a body of work for a solo show in August. And these works are larger ink transfers, but they come from these little, small, tiny found photographs at a secondhand store. These women, very tiny black and white photographs that for some reason at the time, I scratched out the faces. I used razor blades and kind of almost tore back the backgrounds. Like it was like there was something happening and there was this just taking out the face. So now I've taken photos of those and blowing up into these larger ink transfers. So it really, there's a lot, I'm writing a lot at the same time I'm making this work because of things that I've went through personally in the last couple of years with big moves, big breakups, pandemic, things of that, and who am I, and things that having a body, actually having a photograph. This is very, very different for me because I usually go really abstract with materials and tear them apart and put them, this is very flat, very quiet, and very ethereal. So there's some things that are happening that I'm really interested in. It's uncomfortable, but I'm really feel like I'm moving through some stuff, and this work should be interesting. I'm right in it right now, so it's a little tricky, kind of a lot of emotions, but really happy that I get to have this space to make this work. So,
awesome. Sara, do you want to say a little bit?
Yeah, just I guess real quickly, I'm kind of at the end of working on a series that explores it's kind of looking back at experiences within an emotionally and verbally abusive dating relationship, and using kind of abstract forms to kind of play out some of those abusive dynamics. So in order to just kind of reflect on that, but then also remove myself somewhat from it. And so those are all kind of two-dimensional paintings when mixed media. And now I'm kind of ending that and thinking about how can I take that into three-dimensional works and working with assemblage.
Wonderful. Nayda? About your current work?
Current work,
Yeah.
I've been tapping into more themes of environment and just looking at the environmental changes going on, you know, stemming after Hurricane Maria hit, and just looking at the different things that have been happening around the world with environment. So I've been exploring those themes right now with ceramics, but who knows? We'll see where it goes from there. Mm-hmm.
Amazing. There was another question about censorship that I thought, based on Nayda's experience that she referenced, if any of your work has been censored. I know that a lot of you have to log off and we're at time, but I don't know if anyone wanted to wrap up with censorship and any of your experiences with that, with your art.
No, not yet. Early days. But no, I haven't had those same experiences.
Yeah. Yeah.
I haven't been censored in a certain sense, but definitely, you know, some of the work when it starts to get heavy in context, it's interesting how male art dealers handle that, and kind of they keep turning this way and keep turning this way and keep turning this way. And so that has been an ongoing, interesting dance that I have played and negotiated and found ways to make sure that this work was shown, and got some pushback for it. But ultimately, so far, I have won that tug of war. So keep on keeping on.
That's yeah, that would be a great topic of conversation for us to explore further, because I'm sure we've all have dealt with that on one way or another. But we are at time. Thank you so much. We went a little bit over. I apologize. I was trying to do my best to stick to that 7 p.m. But thank you so much, Brenda, Sara, Nayda, for your time, for sharing with us your studio process, your artworks, your scholarship. I think that these conversations are very important, and a massive, huge thank you to Sally Brown, because none of this would be possible if it wasn't for her efforts in curating and thinking about spaces to make intentionally for conversations such as this. And I am so blessed and privileged and grateful to be a part of this. So thank you, Sally. I don't know if you wanted to say any last words before we wrap it up.
Thank you all. I just want to give a shout out to all of the artists that are here. There's so many. I hope you all enjoy the exhibit and work as much as me. I just love all your work, and I'm honored to be a part of this all. So thank you, Lesley, Sara, Nayda, Brenda, and everyone here. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.